Hello, I'm Michael Wybrow, and in this video I'm going to talk about the assessments for FIT 3178. So the first assessment, which is due at the end of week 4 and worth 20%, is a design specification for your mobile app. And this is the mobile app that you'll be working on for the rest of the semester, and it's going to describe the technologies that you plan to use. It's going to describe the features of the app, and it's going to describe what the app looks like in terms of its general look and feel and its navigation. So you'll be proposing and designing a mobile app, and you can be totally creative, and this can be an app of your own design. And the unit works best where you come up with an app that you want to make. If you really can't do this, then we offer some suggestions of other ideas, but I'd encourage you to think about and come up with an app that you would like to exist. So there are some requirements that your app must meet, and that's to make use of some of the technologies that we teach throughout the unit. And you must get approval from your lab demonstrator for your idea. And you need to do this before you submit your assessment 1. And this is really about scoping your idea and making sure that 1, it meets the requirements in terms of technology, but also 2, that the idea is not too simple or too extensive. So assessment 2 are where we teach you all of the fundamentals of iOS. So for the lab classes from weeks 1 through 6, we have very detailed prescriptive lab exercises that walk you through all of the basic features that you would use in every app. The fundamentals of building apps and using views, making use of lists, persisting data, working with web services. These are things that almost every app that exists make use of. So each lab has this detailed guided component, which are really just instructions that you follow. None of you should have problems working through that and following those. Each one also has an extension activity, and the extension activity requires you to do some additional reading of particular iOS documentation to understand additional classes that you may need to use to achieve some outcome. So each of these weeks produces a working app. So at the end, you'll have a little portfolio of simple iOS apps. And each one of these is assessed. They're each worth 4%, in total contributing 24% to the unit. And each one is assessed during your following week's lab class. So you have a little interview with your demonstrator. In week 2, you'll show them the app from week 1. In week 3, you'll show them the app from the week 2 lab. And that could just be the guided component if that's all you want to do, or it could be the extension activities if you've done that too. Then, in the later 6 weeks of the unit, you have an opportunity to work on the app of your own design. And we have assessment 3, which is the development progress on that app. So how this works is during your lab classes from weeks 8 through 12, that's 5 weeks, you will show your demonstrator the progress that you've made on the app. And that's 5 weeks, but there's 4 weekly demos that you give. So if you've got a particularly busy week with an assignment, you don't have to do it every week. And in each of these demonstrations, you show whatever you've developed and what the current progress of your app looks like. And you'll run the app, you'll show it, you'll talk about any problems. And this has a couple of purposes. 1, it means that you're working on the app steadily throughout the semester. 2, it allows us to see if you've encountered any problems and give you advice. and help you implement it in the most effective way. And also to give you feedback so that your app can be the best it can be in its final form. So let's talk about the final form. That is assessment 4, your final mobile app. This is submitted after the end of the 12 teaching weeks in the Friday of week 14. It's worth 30% of the unit, but if you count those check-ins, ultimately that final app is worth around 50% of the unit. And you're required to submit your app, and you'll have obviously been spending sort of half of the time in the unit building this. Part of that will be submitting the code, but also an interview where you demonstrate your final working app to us, and you have an opportunity to demonstrate it to make sure it looks exactly like, or you can show us all of the functionality you want us to see, but you can also in that interview talk about anything in the code that you want your demonstrator to be aware of when they mark it. As part of this, your progress in development, you will be working with Git to store and do version control of your app throughout the unit. The final assessment are quizzes based on the weekly workshops. So the workshops are based on the pre-workshop content, but we go into more detail and cover things. In the workshops, I'll do live coding, we'll have discussions, and the quizzes will be conducted online. And the assessment for these will be worth 1% per week. We assess just the best 10 of 12, so you can submit the quizzes for each of the 12 weeks. And if you do better on 10 of the weeks, we'll take those best 10. So in terms of the submission, I talked a little bit about this with Git. Assessment 1 and 4, you submit via Moodle. There'll be details of the assessments on Moodle. For assessments 2, 3, and 4, that is the first 6 weeks of lab exercises, your check-ins, and the final app, it's expected that you keep them in a Git repository, and there's instructions in the lab exercises on how to do that. And your demonstrator may go and look at your Git revisions and have a look at that progress if necessary. In general, feedback will be given to you within 2 weeks of submission, which is pretty general across the university. For late submissions, 10% total mark deduction for each day late. And assessments 2, 3, and 5 will be done as part of your lab classes or in workshops. So the actual assessments will happen in class time, and as a result, for the lab exercises, you'll get immediate feedback given to you in class. Extensions can be considered if you apply for special considerations. There's a standard process for this. And you must do that within 2 working days. The details can be found at the standard Monash special consideration link. Let us know if you have any special circumstances and require this. Make sure that you complete your assessments before the deadline. This is not a unit where you can leave things till the day before and then do it. You'll run into trouble, you'll get stuck, you won't have anything working. Also, getting sick on the deadline is not an excuse. You should be working progressively throughout the unit, and as is computer failure, you should be using Git and always have backups. So in terms of academic misconduct, we have a zero tolerance attitude to this. Our assessment is about checking what you've learned in the unit. We need to be able to assess your own work and your own understanding. If there's plagiarism or collusion, it's likely to result in a mark of 0. If you're found guilty of academic misconduct, there's a Monash disciplinary process for this. We're talking about writing software. Obviously, there's it's very common to use third-party libraries or use sites like Stack Overflow or other things like that. You can totally do that, that's fine. But if you do have code that you get from somewhere, then you need to provide comments and say where this came from, in the same way that as a professional you would do this in industry. If your name is against some code that you wrote and you didn't write it, or you found it somewhere else, you want to be able to go back and look at the original source if something's wrong or if it needs to be maintained. Similarly, we follow best practices, which means if you use any open source library, you need to reference it, which is usually part of the terms of using any kind of open source library. The licenses require you to correctly attribute your use of it. So we require that in the unit. I want to mention about generative AI. At this point, I'm sure that most of you are aware of and have probably used Gen AI tools. So, generative AI is powerful. They are a class of productivity tools, and they can certainly suggest how to do things. They can suggest how to solve problems. They're very good at summarization. But the suggestions that come from Gen AI may not be what we've taught in the unit. They often won't be the easiest way to do things, and they won't always follow best practices. Sometimes they can be out of date. Additionally, excuse me, generative AI often can't or won't tell you where it sourced its information. If it's following a probabilistic model where it suggests what comes next based on what you've asked and what came before, it's really coming from everything that it's ingested. So it won't have those answers for you. Another aspect to this is there's probably an expectation that as you enter the workforce after you graduate university, that you'll be expected to be familiar with and work with Gen AI tools. This is kind of an aspect of any job in industry, but especially IT jobs. So as a result, we expect and are okay with you making use of Gen AI, but we want you to understand that it is not just a panacea. It's not going to always just give the right answers for things. There's costs to using it, and there's a responsibility that you can check what is produced and make sure it's right. So my suggestion is, by all means, if you're happy to use Gen AI, do so. I understand some people may have objections to its use, and that is okay too. But if you do want to use it, then use it for doing kind of background checking, or to improve your writing or grammar. That's okay. But be aware that it won't always produce the right thing. So you're responsible for anything it creates. And I would say for something like the first assessment, where the role of that assessment is for you to figure out what you want to build, the best way to do that assignment is to engage in that process and think about the design and chat about it with your demonstrator and refine it. So if you do use Gen AI, you need to describe how you used it and specify prompts. But ultimately, the thing to understand in terms of the assessment in the unit is we want to assess your understanding, not what a large language model can produce. So for this reason, our assessments 2, 3, and 4 in the unit all have an interview component where you're asked questions about what you produce. So if you've got code in your app, you should be able to explain why you made a particular design decision, or why you wrote a particular piece of code, or what a particular piece of code does. And that would be the same in industry, regardless of whether you used Gen AI tools to help you code something. You're the person responsible for that code, and You need to be able to provide some assurances of its correctness. Okay, thanks for watching.